I say good morning. I think they got it.
It gave me difficulties.
So I'm going to get everybody to quiet down because I want everyone to hear me.
I only have like 2 kids.
Try to be as quiet as you can be. Because we're going to tell you a little bit about Mobile history, Alabama history, national history, world history, all wrapped up into this story that came, she said, out of the Mobile Bay. So, today I'm going to tell you about the Clotilda. The Clotilda was the last known slave ship to come into the United States. The last known slave ship, the Clotilda, came into which is where the Africatown Heritage House is. There's Magazine Point, there's Kelly Hills, Happy Hills, and Lewis Quarters. So these photos are pretty small, so a lot of you can't see them. So once you all get up at the end, you can come to the table and see the photos. But today I'm going to talk to you about the memory keeper, and I'm going to talk to you about this story. So, in 1927, Zora Neale Hurston came to Africatown to interview Pasula Lewis. This is Pasula Lewis on my shirt. Uncle Cujo is what they called him in Africatown. I want everybody to say Uncle Cujo. Uncle Cujo. So Uncle Cujo was the storyteller. He was the griot. He was the keeper of memories. Now, why was he important? Pasula was one of the last known survivors of the Clotilda in 1927 when Zora Neale Hurston came here to Mobile to interview him for his story of his journey aboard the Clotilda, the last known U.S. slave ship. He gave her his story. He told her about his life in West Africa, about his journey aboard the ship, about coming to America and beginning a life here after the end of slavery in 1865. When she took the book back to her publishers, they told her that they were not going to publish his book. She wrote the book in his dialect. She wrote it with the this, and the that. She wrote it with his Southern twang mixed in with Yoruba language. And so the publishers refused to publish that book, so it sat on the shelf for 90 years. Yes, 90 years. In 2018, that book was published. That's within your lifetime. A year after that, the Clotilda was rediscovered in Mobile Bay. A few years after that, we now have the Africatown Heritage House, where every day we educate people about the story of the Clotilda. Now, why is that important to you? We're talking about memory keepers. So I'm going to tell you the story of the Clotilda today. But just know that once you learn this information, your title has changed. You all will be memory keepers. And what that means is you are called to educate others about the story of the Clotilda, the last known U.S. slave ship to come into the United States. So let's roll it back a little bit because we're about to make some memory keepers. 1808. Cotton was king. Wealthy plantation owners needed workers, slaves for their land. But in 1808, the importation of slavery was deemed illegal. You could no longer bring African people from their continent to America to work in enslavement. 1808 is when that happened. Remember, slavery didn't end until 1865. So, in 1808, it was deemed illegal to bring people as cargo into the United States. So, within the time of 1808 and 1865, the domestic slave trade kicked into gear. And that is when people were breeding people to continue the industry of big cotton. Comes along, the Civil War comes along. 1860, Timothy Mayer, who was a wealthy businessman in Mobile, he had made a bet 2 years prior that he could go over to Africa and get a shipload of people to bring back to America to work. Two years later, after 1858 and 1860, he commissioned William Foster. William Foster had a ship. It was called the Clotilda. The Clotilda was not a large slave ship like people would think it is. It was a schooner. It was built for speed. It was a merchant ship. So they commissioned this merchant ship to go to Africa. So they headed out with $9,000 in gold to purchase 125 people. They went over to Africa, and when they got there were 125 people who had been captured and were waiting in a barracoon. A barracoon is somewhat like a cell. But when he got to shore with his ship, he noticed that there were ships patrolling the waters. Because remember, this is an illegal act. When he saw those ships patrolling the waters, he went to shore, gathered as many as he could. He ended up getting 110. 110 people ended up as cargo aboard the Clotilda ship. Remember now, 110 made it on the ship. 110 did not arrive in America. I wanted you all to see what the size of the ship is. Not the size of the ship, the size of the hold of the ship. I believe I was told it's about 150 of you in here now. So I marked some spaces here. So from where I am standing to where that next line over is over there, that's roughly 28 feet. That's the length of the hold of the ship. From there to that stick that I placed in the ground, that's roughly 16 feet. That's the width of the hold of the ship. Now imagine all 100 and however many of you inside the hold of this ship for almost 2 months in the summer of 1860. We're told that that ship rocked. That ship rocked day and night. They ran into a storm on their way back. Clotilda Lewis, the storyteller who kept the story going, he said that he had heard a bell and Mobile on July 8th of 1860. They were snuck up the Mobile River, taken off the ship, and the ship went up in flames. Now, why did they burn that ship? Why did they burn the ship? I need a brave soul. Why did they burn the ship? Can you speak a little louder? Right. They were burning the evidence. They burned the evidence because, remember, this was a crime. This was a crime. Great answer. I have a gift for you afterwards. This was a crime, and they wanted to get rid of the evidence. We're told that not only was the ship burned, but some years later the ship was also bombed to further get rid of the evidence. So they burned the ship, they took the people off of the ship, they hid them in the cane brake, and then they shipped them upriver, where they worked in slavery as enslaved people for the next 5 years. Some of them made their way back to Africa Town. After the Emancipation Proclamation was signed and freedom came, a lot of them, they wanted to go home. They wanted to go back to Africa. Because you see, when they came here, they came knowing that they were free. They had their own governmental systems back home. They had their own customs back home. They had their own way of doing things back home. They had their own rituals. So they wanted to go home. They approached Timothy Mayer and William Foster and they said, "We want to go home. Will you help us go home?" And they were denied help. So this is where resilience comes in. They worked alongside the people who were in Africa Town, that area, before they came here. And they built a community that's there now. They saved their money. There are stories of how the women would sell their fruits and their vegetables in the market. They saved their money so that they could purchase a home. They would walk miles and miles and miles to a church until they built their own church. Union Baptist Church still stands today, and it's still active today. In addition, they started a school, Mobile County Training School. This school is one of the oldest Rosenwald schools in the nation. Still functioning today, when a lot of Rosenwald schools are now museums or are no longer in existence. When we talk about the Clotilda, we're talking about people, not about the ship. There's a quote from Joycelyn Davis, one of the descendants of the Clotilda. It was made popular in the Netflix documentary that I asked you all to watch called Descendant. But the quote says, it's not about the ship, it's about the people. The people are still here. The people are still in Mobile. The people are still in Gee's Bend. The people are still in Montgomery. The people are all over the United States who came over on that last voyage. Something that makes the Clotilda unique is it's the only verified slave ship in the world. And you have an opportunity to visit it here in Mobile, Alabama. It's the most documented slave ship in the world. There have been people who have come from all over the United States to learn about this story. I'm just giving you the cliff notes here today. Because what would Black History Month be without you learning about the Clotilda? Something that is right in your backyard. This is not just the story of the Clotilda descendants. This is the story of all of us. This is the story of Mobile. This is the story of Alabama. When I talk to students, I always leave them with a charge. And that charge is, I am 41 years old. When I was your age, I loved to be with my friends. And I don't expect any less of you. I don't expect any less of you. But you know what I wish? I wish that I had an opportunity to go back and sit and learn from my elders. Because they're gone now. And the answers that they have, I can't get. So my charge to you is to begin to start a conversation with your elders. Ask them, where did our family come from? What community were we a part of? And it doesn't have to be deep conversation. It can be simple, something as simple as, what types of food did you cook when you were younger? It could be, what type of games did you play? What did dating look like when you were younger? Ask the questions. Trust me. They'll be happy you did. So, we learned about Africa Town. We learned about the founding of the ship. So, I have some goodies here for you all. I have some bracelets, some pencils, and I want you all to come up, ask questions. I'm here to ask any questions that you may have. Do you all have any questions? Oh, you have a blue shirt.
So, is the current Clotilda in Mobile, is that a replica of the ship or the original?
So he asked, his question was, is the Clotilda that's in Mobile a replica of the ship? So, at the Africa Town Heritage House, we have artifacts from the ship. So if you look here, this is one of the artifacts from the ship. So we have artifacts from the ship inside our exhibit, but the ship is actually in Mobile Bay. And they do trips out to the ship site. Now you cannot see the ship because it is underwater, but the real ship is in Mobile Bay and you can take a trip to it, and certain schools have taken trips to the ship site. Any other questions? Back here?
When did the voyage start? When did the voyage start?
So the voyage to the Clotilda, so they arrived in the Puerto Rico in March of 1860. You have a question? I can't hear you. Speak up for me. You can scream, it's okay.
The people that were enslaved, they don't people that were enslaved, they don't buy.
The people who were enslaved?
No, the people that were at Marcus Land, they got food.
His question was, did the people who bought the slaves die too? They died, but they didn't die immediately, so they died several years later. Yes? Great question. I'm glad you asked that because I can circle back around to it. So his question was, how many people came off of the ship? Do you all remember how many were on the ship? Oh man, I did a great job today. Okay, so yes, 110 were brought aboard on the Clotilda ship, but only 103 made it to America. So 7 people did not make it to America after that journey. We had a question over here. Huh? Going to the African Heritage House? So wonderful, that's a great question. So his question was, what's the point in going to the African Heritage House if I cannot see the ship? One is you get to meet the descendants from the ship. You get to meet the descendants from the Clotilda survivors. That's one thing. That's a very unique experience that you really don't get at many museums. Another one is you actually get to see the ship pieces from the ship. So you get to see the burn marks on the ship. You get to see the evidence of how they determined that this is the Clotilda. You also get to visit the community that they built. That's right in the middle of Plateau. That still existed today. You get to meet the community members who work alongside the survivors of the Clotilda and learn about their story. So this is not just a museum that you go and you see. This is an experience. That's what the African Heritage House provides. Yes. How many ships? So that I do not have the answer to, and I do apologize for that. Her question was, how many ships were there between 1808 and 1865 before they stopped the ships from coming into the United States? So I don't have the question of how many ships, but I can tell you that 2 years prior to the Clotilda's arrival, a ship arrived in South Carolina called the Wanderer, and it had roughly about 300 to 400 people on that ship. Right here. Why the 7 people died? So, his question was, do I know the reason why the 7 people died? I don't have the reason why the 7 people died, but I can tell you that their meals were paltry meals. They had very little water to drink daily, so they could have died from malnutrition. They could have died from other circumstances. Some could have, we were told that there were 2 people who jumped aboard because they didn't want to be enslaved. One thing that someone told us is that during the transatlantic slave trade, the pattern of sharks changed. And the pattern of sharks changed because they knew if they followed the ships, more than likely they would eat. So we don't know exactly why or how all of the people who didn't make it to America died, but we do know that, their lives are represented. We consider the African Heritage House a representation of all of those who were aboard the ship and not just the ones who made it to the American shores. Questions? Yes. So that's an amazing question. His question was, out of the 110, were there any kids? So we're told that the oldest person was 25 years old and the youngest person was 2 years old. Matilda McCreer was the last living survivor of the Clotilda. She passed away in 1940. She was on the ship with her mother and 2 of her sisters. So yes, there were children on the ship, and there were many of them among your age on the ship. Right. His question was, if there were 110 people on the ship, and this space that I mapped out is the whole of the ship, how did they fit into this space? Which is a great question. He asked if they had beds. So there were barracks built inside of the hold of the ship. So the people were stacked in barracks. That's how they were able to fit into this space.
The people who bought the slaves on the Clotilda did end up being punished since it was illegal.
The people who brought the slaves on the Clotilda, did they end up being punished because it was illegal? William Foster and Timothy Mayer went to trial in front of a jury of their peers. William Foster received a fine of $1,000 for not reporting the cargo on his ship. That was the only punishment rendered by the courts. Any other questions? Yes.
How long did it take to build the church?
How long did it take to build the church? So I don't have the answer of how long it took to build the church, but the church has been restored over the years and it still stands in Africatown today. If you come to Africatown, you'll be able to see the church, and also there's a bust of Kasula Lewis out in front of the church as well. You all have some great questions. Yes?
Any pregnant women on board?
Was there any pregnant women on board? So I'm not sure if there were pregnant women on board, but we were told that there was a baby born, so I'm guessing yes. Yes. Any more questions? These were great questions. Yes. because we know that 7 did not make it, so he wants to know how was it that they all survived. The only question that I can really give is the will. The will to survive. When you are placed in circumstances and situations where you have to fight for your life and the only option is death, you choose life. Any other questions? Yes. That's the question I really don't have as far as the food, how the food lasts. They had ways of packaging it back then, but I don't have that information. That's a great question. So this young lady wanted to know, how do we collect pieces of the ship if it was underwater? So Ben Raines is a journalist who rediscovered the ship. He worked with USM, University of Southern Mississippi, and they went down and dove down to the ship and brought up pieces. After that, then conservationists started working with them to identify the ship, and there were professional divers who went down to gather pieces of the ship to verify whether it was the Clotilda. So it's because of those divers that we know today that this is in fact the Clotilda ship.
We want to thank you for coming out today. Everybody give a round of applause.